Joe Biden campaign volunteers are quitting in droves. Take a look at this.
Because of what's going on.
A group of staffers working on President Joe Biden's re-election campaign warned the president that his volunteers are quitting in droves over his handling of Israel's military response in the Gaza Strip. Biden has faced immense pressure from members of his own party over the U.S. policies in light of the surprise Hamas attack on October 7th. You know, look, we have a lot of people come on the show who are Jewish. That may be surprising for many people who watch to know.
Well, other people think it's too many people who are Jewish.
Well, we
get criticized both ways.
I think we have 10 times the national average of Jewish people, of guests who are Jewish. So someone did a thing, it was like it was 21% of our guests are Jewish or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably because they're Abrahamic conservatives. I don't know, whatever. Mm-hmm. And they're prominent social media personalities or whatever. But I literally don't care. However, we talk to a lot of these people, and it's really fascinating to hear what they'll say behind the scenes about their family members. Mm-hmm. They'll say on the show, a lot of progressive Jewish individuals are waking up to what the left is and what Democrats are doing because of the attack on Israel. Behind the scenes, they'll say the same thing, but be a bit more specific because they don't want to put their families at risk. I can respect that. And they'll say, like, I got an aunt and she's liberal and she came freaking out, like, what's going on? And I'm like, I told you. I'm just imagining all of the Hanukkah dinners where you had these liberal Jewish people meeting with their conservative relatives, and the conservatives are like, we told you this was going on and you didn't believe us, and now they do. And now you take a look what's going on with Joe Biden's campaign. This split is insane. Joe Biden is losing staff members because he won't support Hamas.
But who are they? They're not staff members. I mean, they might be paid, but they're saying volunteers, which probably
volunteers.
Which is probably people who are volunteering in their early 20s, mid 20s, maybe up until early 30s, and that group of progressive liberal people tend to be very anti-Israel.
Not even liberal, leftists.
Leftists
yes,
is a good word.
Leftists.
And so it's interesting because it's actually a huge age divide. That's what I think the Democratic Party is starting to realize, that the older members, basically the boomer Democrats, have a very different position on this international issue than their younger cohorts.
That's why
and so instead of it being like, yes, come take this position, volunteer.
A third batch may have just dropped right now within the past few minutes.
That's why you see such an outsized influence of that discussion on social media now. Why, when you look at comment sections on Instagram, it's all Free Palestine
and TikTok, right? This is what we heard reported over and over again, that the mainstream media might be presenting a more pro-Israel presentation, but TikTok was predominantly pro-Palestine.
Those Gen Zers do love Osama bin Laden.
But it was actually the media that on 2023.
But it was actually the media that blew that up, that story. Because it was only like a few people who had, it was like TikTok, it was like only like few million. And then the media talked about it, and next thing you know, it blew up to like billions of views.
Yeah, it's I mean, a few million is still a lot to me.
Yeah, I know. But compared to TikTok views, that's like nothing.
Like right now, you're seeing a live feed. We've had however many decades of colleges that have told you that the place that you were born from is evil, and that your ancestry is evil, and all of those things that your progressive and leftist professors have indoctrinated into the previous generations is finally coming to pass as the new generation hits all of these problems in society right now. There's no love of old Americana or what this country used to be. There's no sense of identity here anymore. And all they're left with is a deep burning hatred for this country.
Yeah.
And a lot of its allies.
It's not surprising that Joe Biden is losing his young volunteers. And I'm presuming they're young. I haven't read all of this.
I guarantee you they're on the younger side.
The same way that Harvard is losing its older billionaire donors who are saying the things that you're teaching the students, the positions the students are taking are incongruous with my views, and I no longer want to support you financially. The thing that young people have to offer any sort of influential campaign is their time and their energy. It's not the billionaire donor that's out knocking on doors, although they contribute in a different way. Their financial contribution means a lot to Harvard, but political campaigns need the young people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think it's good, right? It's not that I like conflict. It's that I like this party having to reckon with itself, that it is saying one thing. Like, it bothers me a lot that people always like, the Republican Party is about to fall apart and it's crazy. And in my position, I think conservative movements have lots of different parts that occasionally basically become allies at times on certain issues. Whereas Democrats tend to be very lockstep. You believe these things, but they no longer realize that they are the party that is preaching things that the older leadership doesn't believe in. It's interesting to see them fall apart in front of our eyes.
Well, we saw that starting with when AOC got elected and when a lot of these younger progressives got elected, right? That there was great divides, but she kind of ended up being more of she fell along party lines on a lot of issues eventually.
The fact that she voted for the Ukraine aid, you're supposed to be a progressive.
Yeah.
Like at least Thomas Massey didn't even vote for that.
Yeah,
Stick to your values.
But Massey's really interesting because he is ultimately principled. He has certain things that he believes in, and he will not back down.
But that's when
I
think you lost the progressives right there. The minute they said yes to this, and they said that we're never going to fund any war, no matter how strong their allies are or how fake our allies are with them, we're not supposed to be funding this wars. We have to be we have to fund healthcare. We have to fund this. And then all of a sudden, you started seeing like they voted no problems. They didn't even like use that as a bargaining chip like they did with the Build Back Better. Like they were using that over Nancy Pelosi's head. That's why it was never been able to pass. And then it took a while that it like had to come back, and then Joe Manchin got involved and all that. So the fact that they didn't use that over the Nancy Pelosi's head, that was really telling about the progressives. So I think now they're using this to show, to like bring back the power they once had. But then it comes to the fact that like, what is your principle? Are you for the war? Or are you against the war? Like, what are you exactly for? Like, it's a lot of.
I think you look at a story like this, and the year has only just begun. And I see two things from this. The first is, we are winning by a lot. With the purchase of X, the boycott of these big companies, the organizational power of the anti-establishment and the pro-constitutional republic faction is tremendous, and seeing more and more victories every single day. And then you see that Joe Biden's volunteers are quitting over an ideological split. The Democrats are fractured. They're falling apart. We've already gone through years of the viral story, Democrat quits party. How many times did we see a story like that? Remember when they were calling into CNN being like, I am quitting. I will never vote Democrat again.
War.
No, this was like a year.
No, but I'm saying like every time there's a war going on, they always say, I'm going to quit the Democratic Party. Do they really do?
And they do. And so in the past few years, you had that viral story where they were calling into C-SPAN complaining about what Joe Biden had been doing. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And it goes viral. We get more and more of that. Now we've got, every couple of months, a Democrat quits and switches to the Republican Party. Now Joe Biden can't even keep volunteers on because they're far left extremists. It's kind of fascinating if you think about it, because a lot of this is fueled by foreign interference using social media manipulation. And I love how the left claimed that for so long over Trump. But the reality is it's targeting them. They always project. You get these apps that are advocating for Hamas, and then these young people become pro-Hamas, and then all of a sudden they quit Joe Biden's campaign, creating a direct probability of Americans uniting around actual American values. So if all of these young people are being subverted into supporting things like Hamas, but it's not the majority, all that will happen is these people will have no political power. America will prevail. The constitutional republic will prevail. Donald Trump will get elected.
But are they really going back? Are they really supporting Hamas, or are they really trying to support the Palestinian cause, like the Palestinian
Hamas.
people? So are there
Yes,
Hamas?
Yeah, look, we can sit here and talk about all the people who are pro-Palestine. I am specifically referring to people who are pro-Hamas.
Why?
Why am I referring to them? Because they in New York were marching around chanting and for Hamas and calling them heroes.
Oh, well, okay, I get what your point, but I'm
when
saying
they had rallies in New York over
you talk
what
about
happened,
the rallies, or you talk about people who are
when they had
not,
rallies in New York and several hundred people show up, the speakers at these events would get up and say the freedom fighters fired 5,000 rockets landing in Tel Aviv, and they all clap and cheer and scream. So those are pro-Hamas protesters in New York City.
Okay.
Sure, if you want to argue that there is an individual on social media who doesn't like Hamas and they're pro-Palestine, I know many of them. I'm not talking about them. Okay. You're allowed to be pro-Palestine, but the problem is most of these people are calling Hamas freedom fighters.
Okay.
That's why they're mad.
Mm-hmm. And the idea is that it will uniquely leach votes from the Democrats, assuming that they don't end up just falling in line when the next election comes, because a lot of them do, right? Like, as much as they hate it, they end up falling in line, vote blue no matter who. Doesn't really matter.
But it's really used to, at least.
Yeah.
That used to be
the hope
thing,
would be that they're so ideologically inclined that for once they won't just end up voting on party lines because they actually have a problem with they actually do support Hamas.
But did you see the recent USA Today poll? They said young voters, younger than me, younger than 35, Trump leads by about 2 or 3 points.
Yep.
And that's really shocking.
I always
thought that between 20 and 30s, you're going to vote blue because you're so lost. Until you start paying taxes and you're like, holy crap, I got to vote Republican because I cannot anymore, the Democrat Party. So you're wondering, these Gen Zs, a lot of them are crazy, but a lot of them are actually waking up.
Yeah, I think they're very divided. I think that you'll have, there'll be an extreme generation where some people sit very far at one end of the political and ideological spectrum, and some people end up sitting, unfortunately, extreme far on the other side. And so I think that it's sort of like when you talk about the economy and you have the disappearing middle class. I think there is the disappearing moderate class of Gen Zs. And, the question would be, are they able to reconcile, or do they ultimately meet on the other end of the political horseshoe, and their norms that we would view as extreme, the things that they agree on are out of the box. We're not going to expect them.
Yeah.
Also, be very, first of all, be very, very careful of any polls that are conducted this early in the election season.
No, but it's telling. I always think of it as like a quiz.
But also, like, be very careful, because what happens a lot of time is if they start projecting that Trump is super far ahead, then people get complacent and they think, I don't have to go out and vote, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So don't lose, if depending on what your thoughts on voting are, if you're really, really pro-Trump, whatever it is, don't allow that to make you complacent, because I do think a lot of times they end up doing that.
I mean, theoretically, it would, I wish, I don't think this is the case, it would fuel a sort of down ticket sprint where people are saying, well, I know exactly who I want to vote for, even if he's ahead. Who else do I care about? Who do I care about on the state level? Who do I care about representing me in the Senate and Congress? Who is my governor? Because if you feel like you've locked up one office, that shouldn't be enough. I don't think this is actually how voters operate. This is my idealistic worldview, that if you feel like, well, I definitely know who's going to be president, you want to send them into their term with strong support, both in Congress and in the states. We'll see.
But going back what you said, like you said, be careful. But maybe you never know. Maybe they're using to say they want to vote for Trump so they could get rid of Biden and put somebody like Gavin Newsom, a younger Democrat. You never know. Yeah. That could be telling. That's why I say I always think of these polls as quiz. And then then when you start going into all these votings, I think of it like all the delegates are like the midterms, like when you take a test in college. Mm-hmm. And then so the general election, that's your final. That's how I see it. So when people are like writing off the polls, I'm like, no, gotta be careful. These polls are telling.
Also, was that done nationwide? Was that done?
Yeah, the USA said it was nationwide.
It was nationwide. Okay.
But it was telling like Joe Biden's losing support by blacks by 25 points from like 2020. Mm-hmm. He's losing Hispanics. Trump is leading with Hispanics, young voters,
and Trump's gaining and all.
And he's gaining. So like Biden went from like 80 to 60.
But do you think that's people who would, part of it is what I'm curious to see is if there's a large number of voters who sit out this election. Like, what is voter turnout actually going to look like?
I think the young ones are, if it's going to be Biden. So I'm thinking, that's what I say.
Because just because they're not voting for Biden doesn't mean that they're nationally gained by Trump.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Remember, a lot of people sat out 2016 because they said, like, I don't like Trump or Hillary. I'm just sitting this one out.
But the same thing in 2020. They sat out too. Yeah. But I'm saying...
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. That's what I'm saying. These polls can be telling as a way of like trying to push Biden out. Donald Trump is, in swing states, winning amongst people who did not vote in 2020 by double-digit margins, some up to 40%. That's what I'm saying. Like, these polls could be telling. I think it's Michigan. To push him out. In Michigan, they poll people who did not vote in 2020, and Trump has a 40% lead. So he's like, it's like 60, 30 or something. And the whole thing, going back at the Hamas war, like... Probably 60-20. The Israel war, like, Trump is leading with the Arab American votes. And like the Republican Party cannot take that for granted. They have to understand both sides of it. It cannot be all 100% pro-Israel. I think the Republican Party is much more tolerant of different views. I think the Democrats are way, way more at each other's throat. Trump is very for both sides. But you see, look at the debate stage, they're both like between DeSantis and Haley, they're both groveling between trying to get like the Israeli and AIPAC endorsements. They're more worried about that than they're worried about the American people. But that's because they're so far behind in the polls. I mean, it almost doesn't matter what they're trying to do, because ultimately the popular vote indicates that they support Trump, and Trump is taking a position that is attempting to be moderate, which also Joe Biden has attempted to be moderate on the issue, and it's failed because people don't trust him. But I'm saying, if the first time ever this poll has ever with the Arab American community and Trump is leading, and remember, they try to push that whole Muslim ban, and they try to like everything with Trump. The fact that he's the Muslim ban. What was that? The whole they were trying to if you look going back to Michigan, that's a heavily populated area of Arabs, and Trump is leading, and that's what Dearborn. But what Muslim ban? The Muslim ban. They try to push that against they try to Who tried to push it? They're trying to, the media. Remember the first thing? You're saying the media was lying about Trump, claiming he wanted a Muslim ban. Right. So that's the one thing when you come to Arabs and Muslims, that's the one thing they just don't like about Trump. But they love everything about his economic policies and stuff like that. But when it came to Israel, even though Trump was very pro-Israel, he did have an understanding of working. The the first country he visited diplomatic was Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So
Abraham Accords.
Yeah, and he worked on that.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that the Republican Party is taking for granted and they're only picking one side and they're groveling, and then you're saying like, yeah, well, they're behind the polls. Look at like DeSantis. He's like bashing.
I just think that Republicans take a third side, which is to say that they don't really want to have an interventionist position at all. There are a lot of Republicans.
But they sound like Bush in the debate stage. They sound like Bush Jr. or Dick Cheney with 3-inch shells and lipstick. So it just reminds me like the Republican Party and even like the RNC, like they have no F's given about the minority and the people, the colored people who are choosing to be Republicans, because they only want to pick the side that they're used to, the whole establishment. Maybe. That's what I'm saying. We have to be careful with this, like the polls are telling, but Republicans, they're very known for fucking shit up. I always say that. Like,
I mean, this is again why I think it's interesting that there are so many Republicans right now who, you know, theoretically they could be divided. They could say, I support this side of that war, I support this side of the war. But there are a fair number of them who are like, the thing is, our focus has to be domestic. Our focus has to be on what's going home. And I don't really hear a similar echo in the Democratic Party. It might be there and just might not be as loud. Republicans have another position to take that is not available to Democratic politicians right now. Democratic politicians have to pick a side. That's what their voters want. Whereas if you're a Republican voter and, you know, maybe you feel real strongly about one side, maybe you feel strongly about the other. If you have a Republican saying, well, obviously this is a big conflict, there's a lot going on there, but my priority is to secure our border.
But there's this like, we need to fund Israel. We need to make sure we need to eliminate them. Like, this is border combat. Like, and then you have DeSantis insulting Arabs, which is now you're like triggering me, and like you're losing people's respect. And like he shouldn't be talking about like Arabs wearing man dresses. I wouldn't be talking when you're wearing 3-inch heels, boy, and you're down in the polls by 55 points.
Yeah.
So, and you're trying to like catch up with a girl.
Do you think like
who's like an Alibaba version of Hillary Clinton?
But do you think like for minority voters that are joining the Republican Party or who are likely to support a Republican candidate this time, do you think they're looking for candidates who support a certain side of the war, or would an America First position appeal to them?
It has to be America First agenda.
That's the only
reason why they want to come to this country.
He also does need to bring up the Abraham Accords a lot, like I think a good amount, because the people who are voting America First are going to be all in on your domestic policy if you're putting, if you're talking about closing the border and shoring up things there, right? Sure. But right now with international conflict being such a big part of the story, pushing them to see that there was a time not that long ago when we did have a more stable, worldview for,
But we have the Republican parties on the stage pushing to fund a country that has a budget surplus when we're running a budget deficit. And we can't even keep up. We just hit 34 trillion.
Argument.
We just hit 34 trillion yesterday. And we're growing. Everybody here owes $105,000 in debt for what? I didn't pay for that for college. I didn't own that for my mortgage. But I got to pay that for some war.
So Israel's got a budget surplus?
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
I mean, their budget surplus, their GDP is about 4% a year. And we're funding their military. We fund 3.8 billion a year. They run a budget surplus.
And between two wars right now, the American people,
for the first time in 35 years, as of January of 2023, Israel posts budget surplus driven by higher tax revenue. So what are they looking at? They're like a budget surplus of $2.85 billion. How much do we give them?
3.8.
So they actually... They could cover a good portion of that at this point.
Yeah. But we want to get the 14 billion. And like right now we have like no money.
They're like, you can pay a little bit more of taxes, can't you? You can go ahead and
we're going to have to pay taxes. We can't.
No,
we're
that's
not going to be able to save the Trump taxes.
The American politicians have no problem bleeding us dry, right? So they don't have a problem with that. And that's an issue right now.
The fact that they want to tie to the border, border tied to border security.
Yeah.
And I'm sick and tired of these Republicans running and trekking down to the southern border. Check your ass back to the Capitol right now and get something done.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.